The still room was burning, and I was not running. 20 years of my life were going up in that room. Every tincture I had ever pressed, every jar my mother's hands had labelled before mine did, the whole of the only work I have ever been good at. And I stood in the doorway with the heat coming at me in waves, and made the calculation anyway, because there was one thing in that house worth more than all of it, and it was made of paper. Behind me, a man who had not raised his voice once in the 6 weeks I had known him was roaring my name in a register. I had never heard from him. And the men who had set the fire were between us, and one of them had already worked out exactly what I was going to do. I want you to understand that I was not brave. I was furious, and I was fast, and I had spent 10 years being told by every sensible person I knew that those letters were worthless. They were about to burn the only evidence in the world that 118 people had been murdered, slowly, on purpose, over a decade. I went in. 10 years earlier, I had wrapped a parcel of dried willow bark and feverfew, tucked a note inside it, and sent it to a pack I had never met and had no reason on earth to care about. My name is Vesna, and I have kept the still room in Belwyn since I was 19, which is younger than anyone should be handed a village's medicine, and older than I felt when it happened. I was 30 that autumn, a woman grown, unmarried, and entirely at peace with both, whatever the village had to say about it, and the village had a great deal to say about it. I had my work. I had my mother's jars. It was enough most days, and on the days it was not, I had learned to be quiet about it. My mother died when I was 18, of a wasting sickness that came slow and took 11 months about it. I wrote to every healer, every holding, every pack within 4 days' ride. Some of them wrote back to say they could not help. Most of them did not write back at all. I sat with her through the last of it, with nothing in my hands but water and willow bark, and I learned the thing that has shaped every year of my life since, which is that the worst part was never the sickness. The worst part was the silence, the knowing that somewhere out there were people who could have answered and simply did not think we were worth the paper. So, when I was 20, and the traders came through Belwyn with the news that the pack out on the Velmarch border was dying, a wasting sickness, they said, slow, taking them a family at a time, and no one would go near it because a struggling border pack is a bad debt, and everyone knew it. I did the only thing I have ever known how to do about silence. I answered it. I packed my best, not my seconds, not the bruised leaf and the weak second pressing that a sensible woman sends to charity. My best, the willow bark I would have given my own village, feverfew, marshmallow root, the good tincture that took 6 weeks to press. I sent it out on the carter's wagon on the 1st of the month, and I tucked a note inside. I want to be careful here, because people have since decided the notes were love letters, and they were not. They were work. They were what I would have written to any healer I was consulting with, and since I had no healer to consult with, and neither apparently did they, I wrote them anyway. What I saw in the traders' descriptions, what I thought it might be, dosages, questions, always questions at the end, every single time. Is it worse in the wet months? Are the children taking it faster than the old? Does it come back after it lifts? Tell me what you see and I can send you something better next time. Nobody wrote back. The first month, I assumed the letter was slow. The third month, I assumed the carter had lost it. By the 6th month, I had stopped assuming anything. And by the end of the first year, I had made my peace with a fact I found genuinely physically difficult to hold, which is that I had become the people who had not answered my mother. Except, I kept sending. That is the part nobody has ever been able to explain, including me. Every 1st of the month for 10 years. Through 2 bad winters, through the year I broke my wrist and packed the parcel one-handed. Through the spring, I was so ill I had the apprentice carry it to the wagon for me. 118 parcels, 118 notes, each one with a question at the end that nobody ever answered. The village thought I was mad. Hesper the carter, who took my coin every month for 10 years to haul it out to the border, told me to my face I was throwing good medicine into a hole. My own apprentice asked me once, carefully, the way you ask a woman a question about the thing she was strange about, why I kept doing it, when they clearly did not want it. "They're taking it," I said. "The parcels never come back. Somebody out there is opening them." They could at least say thank you. They could. I agreed, and taped up the next one and sent it. I stopped expecting a reply somewhere in the 4th year. I never once stopped hoping for one, which is a different thing and considerably more embarrassing to admit. The knock came on a Tuesday morning in my 10th year, and I nearly did not answer it because I had a poultice on the boil. The man on my step filled the whole of my doorway. He was enormous in the specific way that makes a house feel smaller, dressed well, but plainly, travel-stained, and he had the stillness of something that has been holding itself very carefully for a very long time. He was holding a box. "Vesna of Belwyn," he said. "Not a question. That's me. If it's the fever in the Hallow Row houses, I've told them it's the water, not the... It isn't the fever." He set the box down on my step and opened it, and I stopped talking. They were my notes, all of them. 118 slips of paper in my own hand, 10 years of them, tied in bundles of 12 by year, the earliest ones gone soft and brown, at the folds from being handled. Not stored, handled, read a great many times by the look of them, and kept dry, and kept flat, and kept in order. I put my hand on the doorframe, because the doorframe was there. "You kept them," I said. "Everyone. 10 years. My voice did something I was not proud of. 10 years and not one reply. Not one line. I sent you my best marshmallow route through a blizzard, and I asked you every single month whether the children were taking it faster, because I could not treat what I could not see, and you had time to tie them in bundles by year and not 1 hour in a decade to write me back." He did not flinch from it. I have thought about that since. Most men flinch. "No," he said, "I did not have that hour. I want to tell you why, and you are not going to like the answer, and I am going to tell you anyway. Who are you?" "My name is Declan." He looked at me the way you look at something you have imagined so many times that the real thing is almost an assault. 10 years ago I was 17, and my father was dying, and I was the one who opened the first parcel. I have opened every one since. A muscle worked in his jaw. "I'm the Alpha of Velmarch, and I have come 300 miles to ask you for something I have no right to ask, and to give you something I should have given you a decade ago. I want to tell you I said something dignified. You're the border pack, is what I actually said. The struggling one, the bad debt, because everyone knows Velmarch. That is the joke of it, the part I still cannot entirely hold in my head. In 10 years, the dying pack on the border had become the thing that holds the whole northern line, the march that turned back the raids of the last 2 winters, the territory whose alpha the old kingdoms had started calling king, without ever quite deciding to, because it had become embarrassing not to. I had been sending charity parcels to a power. I had spent a decade pitying people who could have bought my entire village twice over. "We were the bad debt," Declan said, "when you started." Sigurd came in behind him. His second, a broad grey man with the look of someone who had ridden 300 miles arguing the whole way, and the 2 of them sat in my kitchen, which was not built for men that size, and told me what I had actually been doing for 10 years. The wasting sickness had never lifted. That was the first thing. It had slowed in the years my parcels came, and it had never once stopped, and it had taken 118 people out of Velmarch in a decade. 1. On average, for every parcel I sent, which is a piece of arithmetic I have not been able to put down since. "It isn't a sickness," Declan said. "We know that now, we've known for 2 years, and we cannot prove a word of it. Then what is it? It's Bracken. I knew the name the way everyone on the border knew it. Alpha Bracken of Duncarrow, whose lands sat upstream of Velmarch's whole water table, who had spent 30 years being the reasonable neighbour, the one who sent grain in the hard years and condolences in the hard winters, and who had, it turned out, been putting something in the water for a decade. Slow, patient, never enough to kill outright, just enough to hollow out a pack, a family at a time, and call it bad luck. He wanted the march, Sigurd said flatly. Didn't want a war for it. Wars get noticed, a pack that simply withers. Nobody looks twice. Nobody even asks. He nearly had it. 2 more years and there'd have been nothing left of Velmarch to take. Why nearly? I said. And Declan looked at me across my own kitchen table with an expression I did not have a name for. Because a woman in Belwyn started sending willow bark, he said. You slowed it down. For 10 years you slowed it down, and you never knew, and he never understood, why we would not die on schedule. I sat with that for a long moment. I did not know what to do with my hands. That's why you came, I said slowly. Not for me. For the notes. Yes. At least he did not lie about it. I will give him that. 118 notes, he said, written across 10 years by a healer who had never met us and had no reason to shade the truth, each one recording exactly what she was told and exactly what she thought it meant. Is it worse in the wet months? Are the children taking it faster? Does it come back when it lifts? He touched the box once and took his hand back. You built a 10-year record of a poisoning, Vesna. You did it by accident, because you were the only person alive who kept asking us questions. There is not another document like it in the North, and the only person who can stand in front of the Pack Council and say what it means is the woman who wrote it. I looked at the box on my table for a long moment. 118 slips of paper. I had thought of them, when I thought of them at all, as the most humiliating thing about me. The questions I had gone on asking a wall for a decade, like a woman who could not take a hint. They're just notes, I said. They're not a document. Half of them are me guessing. The one from the 4th winter is mostly a complaint about my own wrist. The one from the 4th winter says the sickness lifted in the dry month and came back with the rains, and that you thought that was strange for a wasting sickness and wanted to know if the river ran high that year. Declan said it without looking at the box, and I understood, slowly, that he was not reading it. He knew it. The river ran high that year. It runs high every year it came back. You wrote that down 11 years before anyone in the North was willing to say the word poison out loud, and you wrote it because you were annoyed about your wrist, and asked anyway. I did not have anything to say to that. You keep calling it guessing, he said. It's the only honest record that exists. Everything else in the North was written by someone who already wanted an answer. You just wanted to know. I did not know, that morning, what else was in that box. I did not know that the man in my kitchen had an answer to my 10 years of silence that would take the entire shape of my life and turn it inside out. If you want to find out why a decade of letters went unanswered, and whether a woman who spent 10 years learning to expect nothing can survive being told the truth, stay with me. What I found in the bottom of that box is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. I went to Velmarch. Of course I went. I told the village it was for the council and the testimony, and that was true, and it was not remotely the whole of it. What I found there took me 2 days to get my head around. The keep was not grand. It was hard and lean, and full of people who had been surviving on purpose for a decade, and every single one of them knew who I was. That was the part I could not manage. A woman at the well stopped dead when Sigurd said my name, and put her hand over her mouth. A man missing 2 fingers walked me the length of a corridor, telling me about his daughter's fever in the winter of the 3rd year, describing my own tincture back to me in detail, the way you describe something holy. They had been keeping the jars. That is what undid me. Not the thanks. The jars. 10 years of my mother's labelled jars, washed and stacked in the keep's own stores, because nobody in Velmarch had been able to bring themselves to throw one away. "We're a border pack," Sigurd said, watching my face. "Nobody sends us anything. In 10 years, not one holding, not one kingdom, not one healer has ever sent us so much as a bandage. Then the first of every month, without fail, through blizzards, a parcel comes from a woman in Belwyn who's never laid eyes on us, and it's her best, and there's a note in it asking how our children are." He looked away. "You've no idea what that did to this pack, do you? You think you sent us medicine." I found Hesper's ledgers in my second week, and I am not proud of what I did next, because I had worked out by then that somebody had stolen 10 years of replies. It was the only explanation left. Velmarch had been reading my notes. Velmarch had been keeping my jars. A pack that stacks a stranger's jars for a decade does not fail to write back, so somebody had taken them, and I knew exactly who. Because there was one man who had touched every parcel and every road for 10 years and had told me to my face I was throwing good medicine into a hole. I went at Hesper in the Belwyn yard in front of half the village, with a decade of grief in my mouth, and I accused that man of stealing my life. He was guilty of a great deal. I want to be fair to the truth here. He had been skimming my coin for 10 years, charging me the long road rate for a route he ran anyway, and when I pulled his ledgers, he went grey, and admitted every silver of it. He had never touched a letter. There had never been any letters to touch. Nothing had ever come back down that road, not once, in 10 years, and his ledgers, which he had kept meticulously precisely because he was cheating me and needed the numbers to hold, proved it in his own hand. Nobody had stolen my replies. There were no replies. I went back to that box the same night, alone, and I took it apart properly for the first time. And underneath my 118 notes, beneath the false bottom that I had been too shaken to notice on my own doorstep, was the second stack. They were letters. In a hand I did not know, that got steadier as the years went on, the early ones written by a boy, and the late ones by a man. 118 of them, every one addressed to me. Not one of them sent. The children take it faster. You were right. It comes on them in the wet months, and my sister is 7, and I do not know how to write this without asking you for more than you have already given. It came back. It lifted for 2 months, and it came back, and I have read your note from the spring 11 times, looking for what I missed. You asked what I see. I see my father not eating. I see my people thanking a woman who does not know their names. I see a parcel on the first of every month, and I have started to measure my life by it, and I am ashamed of that, and I am telling you anyway, because there is no one else I can tell. It is the 9th year, and I am the Alpha now, and I still cannot send this. I read them until it got light. Something in me went very still and very clear. He was in the yard at dawn, because of course he was. I had the letters in my arms. I did not bother with a greeting. 10 years, I said, and my voice came out steady in a way that frightened me. You wrote me back every single month for 10 years, and you never sent one. Why? And Declan, who had told me the truth about the notes, and the truth about Bracken, and the truth about what he wanted from me, finally told me the last of it. Because Bracken had the road, he said. Every road. He held the whole border and he read everything that crossed it. We knew that by the 2nd year. It's why we never sent word to anyone about the water. Because the moment we did, the pack that helped us became a pack he'd handle next. And you were not a pack, Vesna. You were one woman in a village with no walls, 300 miles from anyone who could protect you, sending charity to a territory he had spent a decade quietly murdering. His hands closed and opened. One reply, one line in my hand thanking you, going out on that road, and Bracken knows who you are. He knows a healer in Belwyn has been slowing his poison for years and writing down every symptom. How long do you think you'd have lasted? A woman alone with no house behind her name? So you said nothing. For 10 years I said nothing. I wrote it all down, and I put it in a box, and I said nothing. Every month. While the only person in the world who had ever answered us went on believing we couldn't be bothered. His voice cracked on it, and he did not stop. You want to know what it cost? Ask me. I'll tell you. It cost me every single thing except your life, and I would do it again tomorrow. And the fact that you spent 10 years thinking you'd become the people who ignored your mother is the thing I will answer for until I die. I had come into that yard ready to take a decade of pain out of his skin. I stood there instead, with 118 unsent letters in my arms, and understood that the silence I had spent 10 years calling the worst thing that ever happened to me had been, the entire time, the only gift he was strong enough to give me. You should have let me choose, I said. That was mine to risk, not yours. I know. I've known since the 4th year. He looked at me, and there was nothing of the king in it. That's why I came myself. That's why I brought all of it. Yours and mine, every word, the whole cowardly decade of it, and put it in your hands before I asked you for a single thing. You get to choose now, all of it, knowing everything. I would rather you hate me honestly than be protected by me for 1 more month without your consent. Bracken did not wait for the council. He had spent 30 years being the reasonable neighbour, precisely because reasonable men do not get watched, and he understood, the moment a healer from Belwyn rode into Velmarch, exactly what was about to be laid on that table. 10 years of independent notes, and the woman who wrote them. His first move was quiet, which was his way, a whisper into the council's ear that the Velmarch Alpha had produced a convenient decade of documents, and a convenient witness he was obviously bedding, that the whole thing was a fabrication by a dying pack desperate for a claim on Duncarrow's water. It very nearly worked. Half that council was ready to call it a border squabble and go home. So I stood up in front of all of them and did the only thing I know how to do, which is to say the plain truth to people who would rather not hear it. I have never met a single person in this room before this month, I said. I wrote these notes for 10 years to a pack that never once wrote back, which the Alpha of Velmarch will confirm, and which Hesper the Carter's own ledgers prove, and I invite you to check them, because he was robbing me at the time, and kept excellent records. That got a laugh, which I had not expected, and did not want. I am not a witness Velmarch found. I am a witness Velmarch spent 10 years hiding from, at a cost I am still working out. If you want to know whether these notes are honest, look at them. I did not know what I was recording. That is exactly what makes it evidence. Bracken's second move was not quiet. He sent men to Belwyn to burn my still room, because a decade of notes is only half a case. The other half was in my jars, my ledgers, my 20 years of records, showing exactly what I had sent and when. The thing that let anyone match my 118 notes to 118 deaths. The still room was burning, and I was not running. 20 years of my life were going up in that room, and I stood in the doorway and made the calculation anyway, because there was one thing in that house worth more than all of it, and it was made of paper. Behind me, Declan was roaring my name in a register. I had never heard from him, and the men who had set the fire were between us, and one of them had already worked out exactly what I was going to do. I went in. I came out with the ledgers, all 20 years of them, in a wash basket, with my hair singed and both my forearms burned in long stripes where I had carried them out against me. And I dropped that basket in the mud of my own yard and did not let go of it, even when my hands stopped working properly. Declan reached me a breath later. What he did to the men who had set that fire is not something I intend to describe, except to say that Bracken had spent 30 years being very careful never to be noticed, and had chosen, at the very end, to be noticed by the Alpha of Velmarch in person. The council took 4 days. My ledgers matched my notes matched Velmarch's dead. The whole 10-year arithmetic of it, laid out end to end, until even the men who had wanted it to be a border squabble could not look at the table. Bracken's own steward offered the choice between a dead cause and a living one, produced the accounts for what had gone into that water and who had paid for it. They stripped him of Duncarrow and everything in it. He will not see the outside of a cell again. I have been told he still insists it was a sickness. I have decided I do not need him to admit it. Because 118 people did not need his confession, they needed someone to write down what was happening to them, and by an accident of grief and stubbornness, someone did. The reading of the names took most of the 4th day. That was Declan's doing, and the council did not want it. They had their verdict. They wanted their supper. And he stood up and read all 118 anyway, one at a time, slowly, because he had decided that a thing which had been allowed to happen quietly for 10 years was not going to be concluded quietly in an afternoon. I had not known most of the names. That is the part I was not ready for. I had been sending parcels to a number, to the border pack, to them, to a word, for a decade, and they came off his tongue as people, with trades and ages, and the particular small details a man knows about his own. And by the 40th name, I had to put my hands flat on the table. He got to the 11th year and read a name I did recognise, because it was in my own note from that spring. "Is the girl in the mill house any better?" I had asked. Nobody had answered. She was on the list. Sigurd sat down next to me somewhere around the 80th and did not say anything for a while, which I had learned by then was that man's entire vocabulary of comfort. "You're counting the ones you couldn't save," he said eventually. "I'm counting the ones I asked about." Well. He watched his king work down the list, name by name. "Count the other way sometime. There's 400-odd people in this march who are not on that list, and Bracken meant every one of them to be. He had 10 years and a river, and nobody watching, and he still didn't finish. And there's exactly one reason for that, and she's sitting at this table refusing to eat." He stood up. "You'll not believe me. Everyone who's ever done a decade of something for nothing thinks it was nothing, but I've buried the 118. I know how many I didn't have to. I should say, for the record, that there was no scheming noblewoman in any of this, no rival at Velmarch's court, no jealous house working against me. I kept waiting for one. I had spent my life on the outside of enough rooms to expect one. There was only ever a patient man upstream, with 30 years of good manners, and a poisoned river. And I have thought since that this is the truer shape of most evil, not a rival who hates you in a corridor, but a reasonable neighbour who has decided you are a resource that has not finished dying yet. They tended my arms in the Velmarch keep, and the healer, a young man who had learned his trade, he told me, entirely out of the notes tucked into my parcels, which is a thing I still cannot think about without needing to sit down, told me I would carry the scars for life. I decided I did not mind. A woman who spent 10 years being told her letters were worthless ought to have something on her to show for the day they turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Declan did not leave while they wrapped them. When it was done, he set the box on the bed beside me. Both stacks, mine and his, the whole decade. And he did not kneel, and he did not make a speech, because he had finally learned, I think, that I had never once wanted either of those things. He handed me a slip of paper, one note, in his hand, folded the way I had folded mine for 10 years. It was the 119th letter, the first one he ever sent. I will not tell you what it said. That one is mine. I will tell you that it ended, as every one of mine had ended for 10 years, with a question, and that after a decade of asking the dark whether the children were taking it faster and hearing nothing come back, I finally understood what it costs to be the one waiting for an answer, and I did not make him wait. I kissed him first, with my bandaged arms and his 10 years of cowardice and my 10 years of silence, finally on the same side of the door. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since I was 18 years old and learned what it is to write into a silence that never writes back. The fallout was long, and it was not simple. Duncarrow's water table had to be dug out and rebuilt, a project that will outlive both of us. Velmarch's dead did not come back for a verdict. There were families in that march who did not want a healer from Belwyn honoured for a decade of parcels that arrived too late for their particular child. And they were not wrong, and I have never once argued with any of them. 2 years on, I still keep the still room. The new one, rebuilt in Velmarch, 3 times the size and stocked with everything the old one never had. Half the border thinks it beneath a lunar. I have found I do not care what half the border thinks, which is a freedom I did not know I was owed, until a man rode 300 miles to hand me a box. The jars came back to me too. All of them. 10 years of my mother's labelled jars, washed and stacked in the Velmarch stores by people who could not bring themselves to throw one away. Declan had them brought to the new still room the week it was finished, every last one, and said nothing about it, and left me alone in the room to find them. My mother labelled the first 40 of those in her own hand. I had not seen her handwriting in 12 years. I sat on the floor of a still room 300 miles from Belwyn and read her writing off a jar that had crossed a border, saved a stranger's child, and come home. And I want to tell you, I was dignified about it. And I was not. Hesper, of all people, still carries for me. He paid back every silver he skimmed, in full, in instalments, and refused to be forgiven any of it. And he runs the Belwyn Road twice a month now, free, hauling parcels out to whichever holding on that border has nothing and no one. He tells everyone it is penance. Sigurd says it is the only honest apology he has ever seen a man complete. I think they are both right. And the first of every month, I still send a parcel. To somewhere else now. A new holding. A poor one. Whichever the traders say has been forgotten this year. My best. Never my seconds. With a note in it. With a question at the end. Nobody writes back. They almost never do. I have stopped needing them to, because I know now what I did not know for 10 years, which is that the silence is not the answer. The silence is just the part before it. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd been sensible in my 4th year, the way everyone told me to be. If I'd stopped. 118 notes, and the case would have been 18 notes, and Velmarch would be a story about a pack that withered, and nobody looked twice. I do not like where that thought ends, so I do not finish it. But I wonder about you. Was he right to stay silent for 10 years to keep me alive? Or should he have sent one line and let me choose the risk myself? I genuinely do not know. Tell me what you think in the comments.
There were 9 people on the floor of that chamber, and I was the only one still upright. And the man I had come to save was going down. I want to be precise about what that room was. Because everyone in the north has since decided it was a miracle, and it was not. It was arithmetic. Every soul who crossed that threshold went down inside a minute. The healers, the guards, 2 of the council. A man who had held a shield wall for 11 years, down like cut wheat, and the whole kingdom had spent 9 years calling that majesty. I got 11 minutes. That was my entire margin. 11 minutes of being upright in a room that put everyone else on the floor, and I had to cross it and get the thing out of his hands, and I could already feel the edges of my own vision going soft. Behind me, a man who had spent 9 years running a kingdom through a keyhole was shouting at me to stop. I did not stop. I had been tired for 6 years. I was extremely good at not stopping. 11 weeks earlier, I had fallen asleep on a bench in front of the Alpha King of Cairnhold and started snoring. My name is Isolde, and I was, at that point, a maid on the 3rd floor of Cairnhold Keep. Working my second triple shift of the week because Marta had a bad hip and Nessa's boy was sick, and somebody had to do the West Corridor. I was 5 and 20. I had been tired since I was 19. I want you to understand that as a physical fact about me, rather than a complaint, 6 years of triple shifts does something permanent to a person. And what it had done to me was that I had entirely lost the ability to be frightened of anything at 4 in the afternoon. I had no capacity left. Terror requires energy I did not have. That turned out to matter more than anything else about me. The presentation was the housekeeper's idea, and it was a punishment, though she would have called it an honour. Twice a year the household presented its unbonded women to the king. Not a choosing. Cairnhold had no such custom, simply a formality, a line of women in clean aprons standing in the lesser hall so the crown could confirm the household role. It took an hour. It was, by every account I had ever heard, the single most unpleasant hour available to a woman in that keep. Because of the presence, that is what they called it. King Caedmon of Cairnhold had the strongest alpha presence in the Northern Territories, and I had been hearing about it since the day I arrived at 14. Women fainted. Grown men went grey and had to sit down. There were so many stories, of Omegas who had trembled so hard they could not walk, who had fled the hall in tears, who had gone to their knees without deciding to. It was the proof of him. It was the whole architecture of what he was. An alpha so strong that being in a room with him was more than an ordinary person could physically bear. The court told that story with enormous pride. I want that on the record. They were proud of it. I stood in that line at 4 in the afternoon, on the tail of 19 hours awake, and the girl beside me was shaking so hard I could hear her apron. It's not so bad, I told her, which was a lie. I had never been in a room with him in my life. The doors opened. He came in. And I felt it. I want to be honest. I felt exactly what everyone else felt, and this is the entire hinge of this story, so please hold on to it. It was not terror. It was not awe. It was, precisely and specifically, the feeling of the moment your head goes down at a table when you have been awake too long. A warm, heavy, entirely pleasant weight coming up through the back of the skull, and the floor getting further away, and everything mattering considerably less than it had a moment before. I had felt that exact sensation 400 times. I had felt it that morning, on a stair, holding a bucket. Everyone in that line had been told their whole lives that this feeling was the presence of overwhelming power, and so every one of them experienced it as overwhelming power, and reacted accordingly. The girl beside me made a small sound, and locked her knees, and started to shake in earnest. I was too tired to interpret it as anything. So, I did what a woman who has been awake for 19 hours does when a warm, heavy weight comes up through the back of her skull in a quiet room. I looked around, saw a bench against the wall, walked over to it, sat down, and went to sleep. I did not decide to. There was no decision anywhere in it. I have been told since that I yawned first, hugely, without covering my mouth, in front of the King of Cairnhold and his entire household, and that I was asleep in under 30 seconds, and that I snored. Not delicately. I am told it was substantial. I woke up because Osric was shaking my shoulder, and Osric is the king's second, and a man built like a door, and his face when I opened my eyes is a thing I will carry to my grave. He looked like a man watching weather do something it does not do. The hall was empty. Everyone had gone. The presentation had ended 20 minutes earlier. Except for the king, who was still standing exactly where he had been standing when I sat down. In the middle of the floor, not moving, watching me sleep. How long has he been there? I whispered. 26 minutes, Osric said. Doing what? that, Osric's voice had gone strange. Just that. Mistress, I have served that man for 9 years, and I have never seen his face do what it is currently doing, and I would very much like you to stop being asleep in front of him. I got up. I curtsied, badly, because I have never been good at it, and was still half under. Beg pardon, Your Grace. Long week. King Caedmon of Cairnhold looked at me for a long moment. Up close, he was younger than I expected, and grey around the eyes in a way I recognised instantly. Because I saw it in my own basin every morning, that particular greyness is not age. It is depletion. And I knew it on sight the way you know your own language. You fell asleep, he said. Yes, Your Grace. Sorry, Your Grace. Nobody falls asleep. He said it slowly, like a man reading a word he did not know. They faint. They shake. 2 years ago, a woman broke her wrist going down in this hall. Something moved in his face. You yawned. I did, Your Grace. I've been up since 3, and the Alpha King of Cairnhold, terror of the Northern Line, said, Are you well? I was so tired that I answered him honestly, which nobody in that keep had done in 9 years. No, Your Grace, I said. I'm doing 3 shifts, and I've been doing 3 shifts since Candlemas. But I'll be all right if I can get 4 hours. He sent me to bed, not as a courtesy, as an order, delivered to the housekeeper in front of me, that Isolde of the 3rd floor was not to be worked more than 1 shift for a fortnight, and that anyone who altered that arrangement would explain it to him personally. Which is how the whole keep found out by supper that the maid who snored at the king had been rewarded for it, and how, within 4 days, absolutely everyone had decided they knew what was going on between us. They were wrong. What was actually going on was considerably stranger, and it took me 11 weeks to understand it, and by then it had nearly killed us both. He sent for me a second time. I assumed I was in trouble. The whole 3rd floor assumed I was in something else entirely. The truth was neither. He wanted to know whether I would fall asleep again. That was it. That was the whole audience. The King of Cairnhold, alone in a room with a maid, asking her, very carefully, in the tone of a man who has taught himself never to sound like he is asking anyone for anything, whether she would consent to come and stand in a room with him a second time and see what happened. Why, Your Grace? Because nobody has ever come back. He said it flatly, and I did not understand yet how much that sentence cost him. In 9 years. They come once, and they go down, and they are excused from ever attending me again, and the household is very good about it. And the excusing is done kindly, and the result is that I have not been in a room with the same person twice since I took this throne. His hand was flat on the table. Except Osric, who endures it, and Lord Ferris, who stands at the door. I would like to know whether it is different the second time. I have had no way of finding out. I said yes. I want to be clear that I said yes for entirely unromantic reasons. He had given me my sleep back, and he asked instead of ordering, and I have never in my life been able to leave a question alone. It was different the second time. Not much. I lasted perhaps 4 minutes before the warm weight came up, and I had to sit down, and I slept 11 minutes and woke up fine. But it was 4 minutes, where the first time had been under 1, and when I told him so he went so still, I thought something had happened to him. Say that again. It took longer, Your Grace. That's all. It's like I searched for it. It's like brandy, isn't it? First time it takes your legs. 5th time it doesn't. Nobody has a 5th time, Caedmon said. And that, right there, was the lock. That was the thing 9 years and 400 courtiers and every healer in the north had never found. And the only reason I found it was that I was a maid and could not afford to run away from a corridor I was paid to clean. Everyone else in Cairnhold got 1 exposure and then was gently, permanently excused. I got a second, because he asked, and a third, and a fourth, and by the 6th week I could stand in a room with the Alpha King of Cairnhold for 2 hours and feel nothing worse than the pleasant heaviness of a woman who has had a large lunch. I was the only person alive who had ever built a tolerance to him. Because I was the only one who had ever been given a second chance to try. That was the autumn we became friends, which is a word the ballads have since replaced with something else, and I would like it back. Because that is what it was. He could not leave the keep. I want you to understand the size of that. A king who cannot enter a village, cannot walk a market, cannot hold a court that lasts longer than 4 minutes without his own people going down around him like a felled orchard. 9 years of governing through a door. 9 years of every conversation he had ever had being conducted by a man shouting from a threshold. And now there was a maid who could sit in a chair across the room and simply be there for hours. And he did not know what to do with it, and neither did I. We talked about nothing. That is the part I treasure. He asked me about the 3rd floor, and the west corridor, and Marta's hip. He asked me what the keep sounded like at 4 in the morning, because he had never heard it. A king does not walk his own corridors at 4 in the morning, but a maid does, and he wanted to know, and I told him, and he listened like a man hearing about a country he would never visit. Once he asked me what the market smelled like in the autumn. He had not been in it in 9 years. I told him. It took me a quarter of an hour and I made a considerable mess of it. And when I looked up, he had turned his face away, and I did not comment, and I have never once mentioned it since. His wolf started coming in the 8th week. That was Osric's doing. Indirectly, he mentioned, in passing, that the presence was weaker when the king was shifted, which nobody had thought about much, because a shifted Alpha King is not something you put in a room with people either. The wolf turned up at my door on the 3rd floor at 2 in the morning. Enormous, grey-black, filling my entire doorway with the specific sheepish air of an animal who has come somewhere he has not been invited and intends to stay. Absolutely not, I told him. He lay down across my threshold. He was there the next night, and the night after, and by the end of the fortnight, the entire 3rd floor had stopped remarking on it, which is the single most Cairnhold thing about this whole story. And the presence was weaker. He was right about that. Whatever came off that animal was a fraction of what came off the man, and I could sit on the floor beside him with my back against the doorframe and feel almost nothing at all. Kedmon was mortified. I have ordered him to stop, he told me, in the 9th week, with his ears actually red. Twice he listens with tremendous attention and then goes anyway. Osric has begun making a note of it. There is a written record, Isolde, of my wolf's whereabouts, and it says 3rd floor 11 times. He's good company. He doesn't interrupt. He is a traitor, and I have no control over him whatsoever. He looked at me, and then away. He goes because it is the only way any part of me can be near a person without hurting them, and he understood that faster than I did, and I would appreciate it enormously if you did not make me say that sentence again. I did not make him say it again, but I thought about it for a long time afterwards, sitting on a floor beside a wolf at 2 in the morning, and I thought about the greyness around his eyes, and about a man who had asked me, "Are you well?" while an entire kingdom called his condition majesty. I did not know yet what I was actually sitting next to. I did not know that the thing the North called the greatest alpha presence in 9 generations was not power at all, or what it was doing to him, or how little time was left. If you want to find out what a whole kingdom does when it discovers it has spent 9 years admiring a symptom, and whether a maid too tired to be frightened can make 400 people believe her, stay with me. What I worked out on a stairwell is the reason I am telling you any of this. I worked it out because of Marta's hip. That is genuinely how. Marta had been on the West Corridor for 30 years, and she took a tonic for the pain. and I fetched it for her from Master Aldwin's stores twice a month, and in the 10th week I was in that still room, waiting while he measured it out, and I said, idly, making conversation, that I hoped the king's own tonic did more good than Marta's did. Aldwin said, pleasantly, that the king's tonic did a great deal of good, and had done for 9 years, and that his grace had not missed a single evening dose in all that time. I got as far as the stairwell. I sat down on the 4th step with Marta's bottle in my hand and did the arithmetic. And it came out, and it kept coming out, and there was no way to make it come out differently. 9 years of a tonic. 9 years of a presence. I had never once heard a story about King Caedmon's overwhelming presence from before he took the throne. Not one. Everyone in that keep could tell you about the woman who broke her wrist and the ambassador who went down in the Great Hall, and every single one of those stories was 9 years old or less. He had been an alpha his whole life. He had been this for 9 years. And it was getting worse. I had heard that too, from a dozen people, said with enormous pride, the king's presence grows stronger every year. Which is a very fine thing to say about a king, and an absolutely terrifying thing to say about a dose. Something in me went very still and very clear. Nobody had ever examined him. That was the thing that finished it. 9 years, and no healer had ever laid a hand on that man, because every healer who came within 4 paces of him went down inside a minute, and the household had, very kindly and very sensibly, stopped sending them. The condition prevented its own diagnosis. That is not a coincidence. Nothing in nature is that tidy. He was not the most powerful alpha in 9 generations. He was being poisoned, and had been for 9 years, and the entire Northern Territory had spent that decade calling it majesty, and being proud of him for it. I went to Osric first, because I am not a fool, and because I knew exactly what a third-floor maid's word was worth against 9 years of national pride. Osric heard me out. It took a long time, and at the end of it, that enormous, phlegmatic man put his face in his hands, and said, "The ambassador." "What ambassador? Vasily of the Reach." Year 4. Osric's voice had gone thick. He came to test us. He went down in the Great Hall in front of 200 people, and we all. He stopped. We cheered, Isolde. I cheered. A man collapsed on my floor, and I was proud of it. Aldwin did not deny a word of it. That is the part that undid me. He was 70 years old, and he had been keeper of the king's health for 30 of them. And when Osric and I put it to him, he looked at us with complete bewilderment and then complete horror, in that order, and it took about 4 minutes to establish that the man had never once known what he was mixing. The tonic had been prescribed 9 years earlier by his predecessor for the king's headaches, with the formula written out and the instruction that it was on no account to be altered. Aldwin had made it up exactly as written, every evening, for 9 years, faithfully, the way a good servant does. He had never questioned it, because you do not question the formula. He wept when he understood. I have never seen a man that age cry like that, and I hope not to again. His predecessor had died in the year 6, which left the question of who had kept the instruction alive after him, and that was the question I was still holding when Lord Ferris came to see me. I liked Lord Ferris. I need to say that plainly, because it explains why I did not see it, and because I have spent 2 years being angry at myself about it. He was the king's voice. The office had been invented for him in the year 1, and what it meant in practice was that Lord Ferris stood at the door of every audience and relayed. The king spoke. Ferris carried it out to whoever had been unable to remain in the room. Petitions came in through Ferris. Reports went out through Ferris. 9 years of a kingdom being governed through one man's mouth, because there was no other way to do it. He came to my room on the 3rd floor, alone, and he was kind, and he was reasonable, and he was the first person who had ever treated me as though my opinion carried weight. "You're right," he said. "I had not expected that. You are entirely right, Isolde, and I have known for 6 years, and I want you to hear the whole of it from me before you decide what I am." He sat down on my one chair. "I found the formula in the year 5. I understood what it was. And I sat with it for one night and I did not destroy it, and I have not destroyed it since, and I would like to tell you why. There is no why. There is arithmetic." He said it gently. 9 years without a raid on the northern line. 9 years without a challenge, without a border war, without a single alpha in the north willing to test a man whose presence puts a shield captain on the floor. Do you know what we were in the year 1? We were a small territory with a young king and 4 hostile neighbours. And by the year 4, we were untouchable, and not one drop of blood was spilled to make us so. His hands were folded. It has cost one man his health and his solitude. It has bought 40,000 people 9 years of peace. I did not invent that trade. I only declined to end it. It's killing him. Yes, Lord Ferris said. Slowly, he has perhaps 5 years. I have thought about that every day for 6 of them, and I will think about it every day for the rest of my life. And if you asked me to make the choice again tomorrow, I do not know what I would do, but I know what I did, and I know what it bought, and I am not going to pretend to you that it bought nothing. That is the closest thing to a villain in this story. A man who did the arithmetic, and got a real answer, and let it stand. He asked me, kindly, reasonably, at length, to let it stand too. He offered me a great deal. Not a bribe, a position, in daylight, with a title, on the entirely honest grounds that a woman who could stand in the king's presence was worth more to Cairnhold than any maid, and that I could have that life, and the king could have his 5 years, and 40,000 people could have their peace. And when I said no, he did the second thing, which was not kind at all. He went to the council and told them, before I could, that a 3rd-floor maid was claiming the king's presence was a poisoning, and he told them in the most damaging possible way. Which was accurately. He did not slander me. He simply reported what I was saying to a room of men who had built 9 years of national pride on that presence, and let them draw the obvious conclusion about a servant who had spent 11 weeks alone with the king, and now wanted him medicated into an ordinary man. It very nearly worked. They were going to have me removed from the keep by nightfall, what Ferris had not accounted for, and I want to be fair, he could not have, because it had never once happened in 9 years, was that the king came to the council. Not to the door. Into the chamber, in person, and stayed, and the council went down around him in the first 90 seconds, exactly as everybody in that room had spent 9 years being proud of. All of them except me, and when there were 9 men on the floor, and 2 still swaying, and Kedman standing in the middle of it, looking at what he did to a room, he said, to the ones still conscious, quietly, in a voice I had never heard from him in public, look at it. Just once, look at what actually happens, instead of what you have all agreed to call it. That was the moment the arithmetic broke. Not my evidence. Not Aldwin's formula. 9 men on a floor, and a king standing over them saying, look. They took the tonic away that night. Nobody in the north had ever stopped a 9-year dose of anything, and Aldwin was frank with us that he did not know what would happen, and what happened was the worst 4 days of my life. It came off him in waves. That is the only way I can describe it. The presence did not fade, it surged, over and over, as whatever had been building in that man for 9 years came apart, and each surge was worse than anything the keep had ever felt, and by the 2nd day nobody could be in that wing at all. Except me. 11 minutes at a time, which was my tolerance, and my absolute ceiling. And I want to be clear that this is where the romance stops being charming. I went in 11 minutes at a time, 4 times a day, for 4 days. And I came out on my knees every single time, and Osric carried me to a chair, and I sat until I could see. And then I went back in. On the 4th day, he stopped being able to hold on to it, and reached for the one thing he thought would end it fastest. And that is the room I opened this story with. 9 people on the floor. Me upright with 11 minutes, and my vision already going soft at the edges. Ferris behind me at the door, shouting at me to stop, because, and I believe this entirely, he could not bear to watch a second person die for his arithmetic. I crossed that room, and I took it out of his hands. I have never told anyone what it was. It is not mine to tell. What I will tell you is that he let me take it, which is not the same as being disarmed, and that I sat down on the floor of that chamber with the Alpha King of Cairnhold, and I did the only thing I have ever been reliably good at in my entire life. I stayed awake. 11 minutes, and then, when the 11 minutes ran out and the warm weight came up through the back of my skull the way it had on a bench 11 weeks earlier, I did not fight it, and I did not flee. I put my head against the wall beside him, and I went to sleep. Right there, in the middle of the worst hour of his life. And Kedman told me afterward, much afterward, when he could talk about it, that this was the thing that turned it. Not the 11 minutes, the sleeping. That in the 9th year of being a man nobody could survive being near, somebody got tired in his company and simply went under, the way you do beside someone safe. And that he sat on that floor and listened to a maid snore for 2 hours and decided, entirely against his own intention, to survive it. The fallout was enormous, and most of it was not pleasant. Ferris was right about the arithmetic, which is the part nobody likes. Within 8 months of the king becoming an ordinary man in a room, the Northern Line was tested twice. Cairnhold held both times, properly, expensively, with an actual army and actual losses, the way every other territory in the north has always had to. 41 men died in the second one. I have their names. Kedmon reads them at the Spring Council every year and has never once permitted anyone to tell him it was worth it. Ferris was not executed. Kedmon would not have it, and the council could not find the law. The man had never administered a dose, never forged a document, never lied to anyone about anything. He had simply known, and not said. He was stripped of the voice, and the office was abolished, and he lives in the Eastern Holding, and twice a year he writes to the king with observations on the northern border that are, Osric tells me grimly, invariably excellent. Aldwyn did not survive it. Not the trial. There was no trial for him. His own knowledge of what his hands had done for 9 years. He died the following winter. I sat with him at the end, because nobody else would, and the last thing that man said to me was that he had never once questioned a formula in 50 years of practice, and that he had thought that was the same thing as being careful. 2 years on, the King of Cairnhold walks his own market. I cannot describe it any better than that, so I will simply tell you it is the thing I like best in the world. He goes on Thursdays. It took him 4 months to be able to do it without going grey. 9 years of never being in a crowd does not come off a person quickly. And he is still no good at it, and people still get out of his way, and he still cannot quite believe that they do it out of respect for a large man, rather than because their legs have stopped working. He buys things he does not need. Osric says it is becoming a problem. There is a room in Cairnhold Keep that contains, at present, 11 identical wooden spoons. I am not a maid anymore, which I resent in a way that I gather is unusual, and which I have stopped apologising for. I run the household, all of it, the whole keep, the rosters and the corridors and the appalling business of Marta's replacement, and the first thing I did with the authority was abolish the triple shift. Entirely. anywhere in Cairnhold. The steward told me it was impossible and would cost a fortune, and I told him I had personally saved the king's life, with a tolerance I could only have built by being too poor to run away, and that I had strong feelings about the practice. And he stopped arguing. And Kedmon proposed on the bench. The actual bench. He had it kept. 9 weeks after the tonic came off, before I knew he had done it. The bench from the lesser hall, where a maid on 19 hours sat down and went to sleep in front of the entire household. It is in the garden now, in the corner where the sun gets in about 4 in the afternoon. He sat down on it beside me, at 4 in the afternoon, and did not make a speech, because he had asked me first whether I wanted one, and I had said absolutely not. I am going to ask you a question, he said, and I want to say the other part first. You cannot say no to a king. That is simply a fact about kings, and I have thought about it for a year, and I have concluded that the only honest thing I can do about it is this. He put a paper in my hand. It was a household release, signed, sealed, ending my service to the crown entirely, effective that morning. You do not work for me, as of this morning. Whatever you answer, you are not in my household, and you will never again be in a room where I hold your position in one hand and a question in the other. You've made me unemployed. I've made you free, Kedmon said. There is a difference, and it took me a year to learn it, and I would like you to have it before I ask. His hands were not steady. I have not been near a person in 9 years. Not one. And then a woman sat down on that bench and was so entirely unimpressed by the worst thing about me that she fell asleep in the middle of it. And I have never once recovered. And I am not going to. Stay, not in service, beside me. I did not answer him straight away. I put my head on his shoulder, on that bench, in the 4 o'clock sun. And I fell asleep, because I had been up since 5 and old habits are old habits. And I woke up an hour later with his coat over me and the sun gone round, and he had not moved an inch, and that is genuinely how he found out my answer. I kissed him first when I woke up. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced for 6 years against the possibility of ever being allowed to stop. I still wonder about Ferris. That is the honest end of this. 9 years without a raid, and 41 men dead in the second summer after we ended it, and a man in an eastern holding who did the arithmetic 6 years before I did, and got a real answer. I do not think he was right. I have never been able to prove he was wrong, and I have stopped pretending the two are the same thing. Tell me where you land on him, because I have been arguing with myself for 2 years and I would genuinely like the help. Comment the bench if you want to hear what Kedmon's wolf did the first Thursday his king walked into that market, and 40 people worked out at once that they could stand near him. And if you want more nights like this one, a king whose greatest strength was the thing killing him. A kingdom that spent 9 years admiring a symptom, and a woman too tired to be frightened of any of it. Stay close. There is more of Cairnhold left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.